Hello, and welcome to another episode of Making Waves at Sea Level. My name is Thom Singer, and I've been hosting this podcast for nearly 10 years. And thank you so much for those of you who are here with us today and listening. The history of this show is it started off being cool things entrepreneurs do because I wanted to hear from entrepreneurs about the coolest things they were doing in business. It switched over a couple of years ago to making waves at sea level because my work changed from really working around a lot of entrepreneurs to really working with the C-suite inside companies. And again, I was doing an interview show where I was learning so much from people who were shaking things up in their organization. Now, this show has become much shorter episodes with just me talking, although sometimes we will return to that interview format. However, today I want to talk about leaders needing to show up. I talk to a lot of people who have been given advice that they shouldn't show up at community open events because, as one leader told me, the riffraff will just want to talk to me about my success. However, I actually think that a leader has to show up. You can't lead if you're not part of the community. So the advice that, well, you should protect your time and you should never participate in the Chamber of Commerce or your local tech council or other groups where anyone can go, I think it's really bad advice. Now, I would like to follow that up with the fact that there is a time and a place for private curated events. So a lot of C-suite people are invited by their law firm or their venture capitalist to go to a quarterly dinner with other people who have the same job title as them and work for similar type companies. And that way they're just with people who are like them. But much like in our political lives, if we only hang out with people who are exactly like us, we're missing out. We're missing out on the serendipity of having people from different worlds come together and collide so that we can all learn new things. So while I believe, yes, private curated dinners and other organizations that are invite only, I think they're fantastic. But if you really see yourself as a leader, you need to be active in your community. Now, your community could be a city like Austin, Texas, or Los Angeles, or New York. It could be a region, or it could be in a vertical of an industry. So I'm really involved in the National Speakers Association. And one of my communities is this community of professional speakers who are using the spoken word to earn their income or part of their income. And so, that is a community. I'm also the CEO at the Austin Technology Council, which focuses very geographically on Central Texas, trying to bring that community together. And I believe that the real leaders do both. They have private dinners with their friends and people who are just like them and people who belong to, the same country club or whatever it is. They invite people over and drink bourbon by their pool. But real leaders also show up in the community because if you want to be a leader, you can't lead from behind your office door and you can't lead drinking bourbon by your pool. People have to know you, like you, and trust you. So yes, there's a time and a place for those private events, but I encourage all of you who are in the C-suite to find something that you can get behind where you can show up, volunteer your time, support the organization with your finances, and also be there to mentor other people. I talked to someone the other day who said one of the reasons they don't participate in open things in their industry is because the younger up and coming people just want to pick their brain. And this person was all grossed out. He's like, I hate it when people come and say, I want to pick your brain. What they really want is free consulting. I don't have time to share with people. But the more I talked to him and I asked him later, and this was a couple of hours later when we crossed paths again, I asked him about his career and he talked about all the wonderful mentors he had. He said, how did you find those mentors? And it was very interesting because he didn't realize that he actually found mentors who were leaders in the industry and the geographical area where he lived, who showed up at the types of things he participated in when he was young. And here's the thing that I told him. He got really appalled by people saying, I want to pick your brain. He thought it was a horrible thing, free consulting, etc. And I asked him, could you reframe that? Could you look at that as the biggest compliment somebody could give you? Because think about it for a minute. Have you ever been to see a speaker or heard of a local business executive who was highly mediocre? They gave their speech, and when they said, in conclusion, you thought, well, thank God, I'm glad it's over. Or you knew them in the community that they were a jerk, their business wasn't really successful, for whatever reason, you did not admire them. In either case, have you ever walked up to anybody and said, God, I have to have more of you. Can I pick your brain? Can I find out about you? No, we only want to pick the brain of people who we admire. Now, it doesn't mean you have to give everybody an hour's worth of time, but instead of being offended when somebody says they would like to turn to you for advice, to hear your story, or to pick your brain, instead of being appalled by the fact that they would have the nerve to ask you to share your advice, reframe it in your mind. Reframe it where you look at it as like, wow, this person has just paid me the largest compliment they could, because we only ask people for advice if we admire them. So you don't have to spend time with everybody. You don't have to have an open calendar, but instead of being appalled by the thought of it, look at it as pretty good thing. And in fact, I challenge people once in a while to go out into the community. And if after a year of being involved, nobody says, hey, can I pick your brain? Maybe you should relook at the way you're presenting yourself, because if they admire you, they're going to want that advice. They're going to want that mentorship. So we have to be thinking about, how do we get leaders to show up and lead and mentor from the middle of the community, not from their home, not from their office, not by, writing things down and putting it out on social media. But I believe that in the business world, real leaders need to lead from the middle. So I ask you, if you're listening to the show and you're running a business, or you're trying to grow a business, or you want to grow your career in an industry or a region, what are you doing to be a real leader? Who are you mentoring? Who are you helping? I was really fortunate. Early in my career, I had a mentor. Her name was Carol Thompson, and she taught people, how do you build connections that actually lead to real opportunities in business? And she told me when I was young and up and coming to just always go out and treat people well, show up, make introductions, don't show up trying to sell things. Even though I was in sales, it was, show up, be part of the community. And then when I was in my late 30s, she told me, who are you mentoring? Or she asked me, who are you mentoring? She told me the time had come for me to give back to the next generation. And I think that's who real leaders are. They're giving advice to people. They're shuttling people along the way. And in order to do that, you need to be accessible. So my plea with this short episode of the show is to ask yourself, am I there to serve? Now, I know you're busy. You got a company to run. You might have a young family. You've got a lot of stuff going on. Your calendar is full. But can you carve a little bit of time to be the person who serves your community, whatever that community is, that you're willing to mentor people, that you want to help the organizations that exist in your city, in your industry? And when somebody says, can I pick your brain? You'll give them a little bit of time. So here's a little bit of a tip that was given to me years ago, and I implemented it. I often hear from somebody who their friend or their relative would like to be a professional speaker, or maybe they're going to write a book, and they're like, oh, Tom's written a bunch of books. Tom's a professional speaker. And this person, usually living in my area, will call me, and it's the sister of a friend's neighbor. And they'll ask me, hey, can I pick your brain about the speaking business? And I say yes. And I love it if we can do it in person, because I think that even in this digital world where Zoom and podcasts and all these things are great, I think there's nothing like being face-to-face with people. But I tell them, you know what, we have to do it at like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning at the Starbucks near my house. Now, I live in the far south end of the city. And so if somebody lives way north, that could be like a 40-minute drive. And very often people push back and they say, oh, I can't do 7 in the morning, or wow, that's too far. Could you come up here? Well, no, you want free consulting. You want to pick my brain. And so I make it accessible, but I make it on my terms. And so I learned, one of the places I learned this from was I was selling advertising, and I was working on a project in St. Louis. And there was an executive, I won't say who, but from a famous company, who I wanted to sell advertising in the Chamber of Commerce publication that I was working on. I wanted to sell it to this company. And I called the CEO, and this was back in the day where CEOs answered their own phone. And he told me, you can come in and have 15 minutes, but you have to be at my office at 6:30 in the morning. You're going to have to knock on the door because nobody's here but me. And I make the coffee, and that's what we do. And you get 15 or 20 minutes. And I showed up and I pounded on the door. He opened the door. He made me some coffee. And when we sat down in his office, he said, you want to know something funny? 4 out of 5 people never show up at 6:30 in the morning. And he goes, the fact you're here, you have my attention. So I realized that when you have leaders, they want to help people. They want to hear what you're selling. They want to give you advice, but they have to do it on their terms. So instead of putting up a bunch of walls, have a little opening. Make people jump through a little bit of a hoop if they want your advice, if they want to have time on your calendar. Make it so that they can, and make it that you're showing up at things in your community. If you haven't gone to a Chamber of Commerce event or a technology council event or something in your local community where you can show up and just be present, just once in a while, once a month. If you can't remember the last time you showed up at an event where anybody could attend, I'm going to challenge you to rethink that. Don't just go to curated things. Show up in the community and be available to be a mentor, to share. And the next time somebody says, hey, can I pick your brain? Instead of being like, oh, I hate that, rethink it and say, wow, that is a huge compliment that that person just gave me. Because I want you to remember, nobody wants to pick the brain of somebody they view as mediocre or worse. Anyway, thank you for tuning in and listening to this podcast. Or if you're watching it on YouTube, thanks for watching the video this far. Please tune in every week. I'm trying to revamp this podcast. If there's some topics that you'd like me to talk about, please let me know. But go out there today. Have an absolutely great day.